Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing the KTC H27E6 monitor, which I've actually had for about 9 months now. It's just been one of those situations where I'm shifting between the stuff I buy and I want to review and companies wanting to collaborate with me. Unfortunately, a lot of times when that happens, the things I've bought and I want to review get kicked to the very back of the line. And this one I was finally like, all right, I need to review this monitor. With that being said, the price has come down. So this is an even better deal than when I got this 9 months ago. So I'm going to be judging this monitor off of the current price, which is really, really good. Like all of my videos though, I'll be covering the specs first, then getting into the panel menu, my test results, and what you can do with consoles before shifting into what I like, potentially don't like, in the gray area before wrapping the video up. With that being said, let's get into the specs. The KTC H27E6 is a 27-inch 1440p IPS panel monitor with a 300Hz refresh rate that can be overclocked to 320Hz with a reported 1 millisecond motion picture response time. This has a typical brightness of 450 nits with support for HDR400, although this is 8-bit plus FRC and not true 10-bit color. For gaming though, that's not really going to matter. And then this has a static contrast ratio of 1000:1, which is typical for IPS panels. This covers 98% of the DCI-P3 color gamut and supposedly 144% of the sRGB color gamut, but my testing tool only goes up to 100%, so I really have no way of confirming that. For ports, this has 2 HDMI 2.1, 2 DP 1.4, a service USB port, and a headphone jack. For physical adjustments, this can raise and lower 130 millimeters. This can swivel to the left and right 45 degrees, tilt forwards 5 degrees and backwards 20 degrees, and this can pivot in either direction. This only comes in the white molding with the black accents, so there's no like pure white or pure black version of the molding with this. You do have a cable management clip at the bottom of the arm, and then there are RGB lights on the back. Inside of the box you get the monitor, arm, base, power brick, DP cable, and user manual. This comes with a 3-year warranty, which is awesome. I like to see that, instead of the more common 1-year warranty, so you have a little bit more peace of mind with this. Shifting over to the panel menu, I won't be covering this in the same amount of detail as I do with an OLED monitor, but I at least want to touch on what you will find in the panel menu here, even if I don't actually showcase everything. The menu button is towards the bottom right-hand corner on the back side of the monitor, and it is a single button, which I do prefer over multiple buttons. Pushing the button in any direction brings up a quick access menu option. And then if you push this in, you'll bring up the main menu. Here for the tabs, you have display, color, gaming setup, advanced settings, input, and system set. Starting with the display tab, for the options here, you have brightness, contrast, black equalize, sharpness, preset, aspect ratio, display position, and then professional mode. Which the way it highlights the option that you're on, my camera's having a hard time picking the actual lettering up with this, but since we're already on the professional mode, let's go ahead and look at these different options. This is going to be the different color gamut options that you have with the monitor. So here you have native, sRGB, display P3, and DCI P3. Going back to the picture presets, you have user, movie, photo, eco, reader, RTS, and FPS. Next, you have the color tab. Here you will find color temperature, gamma, hue, saturation, low blue light, and color range. For the color temperatures, you have natural, warm, cool, and user. And then after this, you have the gamma. Here you have off and then 4 levels going from the 1.8 to the 2.4. This seems to actually almost shift the color temperature a little bit when I scroll through these, more so than any other monitor that I've used. After this, you have the gaming setup tab. Here you will find the FreeSync/G-Sync option. For all of the footage in this video, I have that enabled, so I do have the G-Sync compatibility mode enabled through the NVIDIA control panel. After that, you have overdrive. I'm going to talk about this more once I get to my test results. Then you have game assist. This is where you're going to find things like your crosshair, if you want to use a timer, anything like that. And then you have the MPRT mode. I'm going to talk about that also once I get to the test results. And the biggest takeaway from all of that is going to be that is a black frame insertion mode. I won't actually test it because I don't need to test it. They're essentially putting a black frame inserted between every normal frame, so it gives the illusion that the monitor is getting faster. Just keep in mind that typically does dim the monitor quite a bit. After this, we have the advanced settings. Here you have HDR, RGB light, DCR, the dynamic contrast ratio, and then you have DDC/CI, that's your display data channel/command interface. So if you want the PC to, or Windows, to be able to adjust things like your brightness and your contrasts. And then last, we have overclock. If you want to get the 320 Hertz, you need to enable this. So towards the top of this, if you notice it's saying, hey, this is 1440p, 300 Hertz, we're in HDR, and we have FreeSync right now. If you were to enable the overclock, that 300 Hertz would turn to 320 if you enable it through either Windows or the NVIDIA or AMD control panel. For the RGB lights, here you have off, breathing, and then just the 3 color options, which are the RGB. With this, no other adjustments. Next, you have the input tab. Pretty straightforward here. The only thing I wanted to highlight is the fact that you can turn this to auto if you want it to auto source the input. You could also just have it so you select whatever the input is as well. And then last, we have system set, which I'm assuming is system settings. Here you have language, OSD setup, LED indicator, audio, hotkey, USB upgrade, and reset. For the hotkeys, the ones that you can change are the left, right, and down. With this, you can choose from brightness, volume, mute, color temperature, game assist, preset, HDR, black equalize, and aspect ratio. Shifting over now to my test results, we're going to start with the Spider X color calibration tool. So there's 4 different color modes that you can use with this monitor. I'm going to go in order. Usually I try to fit it all on screen when there's only 3. There are 4, so it makes it a little bit more complicated because the text is very small here. Starting with native and sRGB. So native is on the left hand side and then the sRGB is on the right hand side. Native is what this is on by default and it has the best results. Here, 100% coverage of the sRGB color gamut. Remember, their claim here was 144%. With that, I'm assuming it's color space, even though they're saying color gamut. But the other claim was 98% coverage of the DCI-P3 color gamut. I'm not seeing that, but they are close. We have 96% of the Adobe RGB, but then 97% of the DCI-P3, so we're off by 1%. And then we have 94% coverage of the NTSC. When it comes to sRGB modes, that is really for a application like Premiere Pro or Photoshop, and you're using it for a very specific reason. It's not something that you would use day to day typically, and especially if you're a gamer, because everything's gonna look more dull. It won't be as vibrant with the colors. And I just see across the board with every monitor that I test that you see that the color gamut comes down. And here, same thing, 94% coverage of the sRGB, 70% coverage of the Adobe RGB, 70% of the DCI-P3, and then 65% of the NTSC. Next, we have Display P3, which I'm not quite sure what that is, but that is going to be on the left-hand side, and then the DCI P3, which is on the right-hand side. Starting with the display P3, 100% coverage of the sRGB, 86% of the Adobe RGB, 93% of the DCI P3, and then 84% of the NTSC. So we're seeing, yes, the coverage for sRGB is still the same, but these other color gamuts, it's coming down with this. When we look at the DCI P3, 100% coverage of sRGB, 86% of the Adobe RGB, 92% of the DCI P3, so just 1% lower than the display P3 there, and then 84% of the NTSC, which, switching between these two modes, it kind of seems like the color temperature changes a little bit, and that's about it. Maybe slight contrast change. In terms of the colors though, I'm not seeing some massive difference like I do when you switch over to an sRGB mode, and again it becomes more dull. Between these modes and native does get that subtle boost and it does look more vibrant. I do find it interesting when you have a DCI P3 color mode, and then when we look at the results, it's not as good as usually what you'll see is wide gamut. In this instance it's native, but you'll also have another color mode that just has more volume when it comes to the color gamut, even though the other one is named after what I would assume would be the one that should have the better result in regards to it. Like when we look at an sRGB color gamut mode, the sRGB isn't even at 100%. It's actually, what was it, like 94%? It is less than these other color modes. And I think that really is because you're seeing it's geared towards a workflow situation or potentially preference in regards to a look. In general, for gamers though, usually you're gonna go with the wide gamut mode, or in this instance, the native mode, because it looks more vibrant overall. Shifting over now to my test results from the on-screen response time testing tool. Here you have, for the different overdrive modes, off, standard, advanced, ultra fast, and then the dynamic overdrive. I've tested all of these. I did try it with just the 300 hertz, and then I overclocked it to 320. I'm not going to showcase the 320 because the results were negligible. With that, it's like half a millisecond difference, maybe at most, with a lot of the numbers here. So with this is with the overdrive off. Looking at the perceived response time, we want a lower number because that means less ghosting. And here for the average complete time, we have 15.36 milliseconds, so not great with this. Again, this is with off. We will see that this does get faster as you increase the response time, but that does come at a cost with the RGB overshoot, which is going to show up as inverse ghosting. The best here is 4.9 milliseconds, worst was 16.8, and then the 02550, which is the black to white to black transition, was 24.5. RGB overshoot, zeros across the board. You have no inverse ghosting, which is good, but again with this, the panel is slower. The visual response rating, it is taking perceived response time and the RGB overshoot, averaging those things out, and then grading it. The average rating here is 81.37, so we're a low B with this. After this, you have standard, and now we do see this does get faster. It is getting better. Average complete time, 12.1 milliseconds. The best is 1.9, worst is 14.8. The 02550 is 22.6, so across the board, this is faster. And when we're looking at RGB overshoot, you see a couple numbers on there, but that's negligible. You could just essentially say they're zeros because you're not going to see any inverse ghosting with these numbers because it's so minuscule. When you look at the visual response rating, we have a good increase here. Average rating is 86.29, which is a solid B. And then we have advanced, and this is where you start to see things fall apart. I would recommend either standard or advanced. The difference between these two is pretty subtle. This is slightly faster. I don't know that it's anything that your eye is really gonna pick up on. But when you look at the perceived response time, comparing it to standard, you're seeing more numbers improve overall. Average complete time is 11.68, which is very subtle in that increase. The best is 2.8, which isn't as good as standard. Worst is 13.6, and then the 02550 is 21.2. So we're getting a subtle increase in the speed of this response time here, but you are seeing more numbers now show up on the RGB overshoot. Here, I don't know that everybody's eye is going to catch the inverse ghosting, but it is potentially there for you to see. Now that's something you notice more with a UFO test when you are actually gaming. I don't know how much of that you're going to see at all when it is only a couple of these transitions where we're getting very noticeable inverse ghosting. So when you're looking at the 22 and the 21, the red on the RGB overshoot there, you can see, hey, 51, 153. So it's in that transition within those grays that you would have some inverse ghosting. So how much does that actually translate to gaming? I would say it's pretty minimal. I don't think most people are going to notice anything with that. When we're looking at the visual response rating, 85.78, and it is because of these higher numbers that you find on the RGB overshoots that it's bringing the whole average down. So pretty close to standard. I would again choose either standard or advanced. And then we have ultra fast, and this is really where we start to see everything fall apart. It gets faster. The performance here is better than advanced. For the average complete time, 11.6. Best is 2.3. Worst is 11.4. 02550 is 20.6. But look at all the red on the RGB overshoot. You now have a lot of visible inverse ghosting, not just on a UFO test, but in game you would notice this a lot more. This is what's also bringing down the overall average. So for the visual response rating, we have the average rating of 83.33. This is all coming down because of how much RGB overshoot this now has. It's just tanking the average rating, where if we didn't have that, you would just see, yeah, generally this is getting much faster with no negative effect to speeding up the panel, but here you do get that inverse ghosting. So I don't know that this is a mode I would choose to use because, again, the inverse ghosting at this point is quite noticeable. And then last we have the dynamic overdrive, which I don't know that my tests will really showcase what this is doing, because I'm assuming to some degree it's picking up on what's going on if you're playing like a first-person shooter, for example, and it's like, oh, okay, now let's dynamically adjust the speed of the panel to match what this person is doing, because this essentially just looks like ultra fast. The numbers are so close, and this would be a good representation of what it was like when I did test the overclocking 320 hertz mode. It was so subtle between the results. It's like, okay, they're basically the same. Average complete time, 11.68. Best, 2.3. Worst, 11.1. 02550 is 20.3. Like really close with that. We're seeing the same struggle with the RGB overshoot and all the red. So you still are seeing inverse ghosting. Average rating, 83.45. compared to the 83.33. Again, super close with this. So if you're gonna use the ultra fasts, you could use the dynamic as well. Just testing it out, I mean, I would have to have a pretty sensitive testing tool that I could read it in real time, and I just don't have that. So between the two modes, I didn't notice a difference when I was playing first-person shooters. If it is there, I think it would still be subtle. And the only thing I could really think that this would improve is potentially the amount of inverse ghosting if it is dynamically adjusting in real time when you are playing faster paced games, where it maybe can reduce some of the RGB overshoot. But again, I don't have the testing tool to really showcase that. When we're looking at the numbers here, you can choose either which one looks better when you're gaming, go with that one. Overall though, if it's more like a set it and forget it, I would say go with standard or advanced for your better overall gaming experience with less ghosting and inverse ghosting when it comes to those modes. Shifting over now to consoles and what you can do with those, starting with the PlayStation 5, and these are going to be pretty similar between this and the Xbox Series X. You have access to 4K, so this will upscale. With that, you cap out at 60 Hertz, but you still get HDR. If you drop down to 1440p and 1080p, you then get access to the 120 Hertz. Across the board, you have the variable refresh rate as well as the auto low latency mode. Shifting over to the Xbox Series X, we have the same thing here, which is the 4K 60 Hertz, but not access to 120 Hertz, or you can do 1440p, 1080p. You can even do 720p on either one of these if you wanted to. Not sure why you would want to do that, but it is an option. When you're looking at the 4K details here, this is where it's saying, hey, you can't do the 120 Hertz. It also doesn't support Dolby Vision. That is a proprietary type of HDR, so you don't have access to that with this monitor. And then you don't have the 4K 24 Hertz or 50 Hertz, which I think that one's a little bit odd, but just keep in mind it is upscaling. If you're dealing with 1440p though, you do have access to the 50 Hertz, which is more geared towards watching content. And then we still have the auto low latency mode with this, as well as the variable refresh rate, and that is something that you can turn to always on or just when you're gaming. So now that I've covered the specs, in-panel menu, my test results, what you can do with consoles, let's get into what I like about this monitor. And I always like to mention, I'm judging this monitor based off its price point, meaning I'm not going to compare this to a monitor that is 2, 3, 4, 5 times the price. That doesn't make sense. This is an extremely affordable IPS panel monitor that you have the 300 Hertz with that can be overclocked to 320 Hertz. That's awesome. I got this for roughly $250. Right now you can pick this up for somewhere close to $200, $210. And at that price point, or even the $250 that I paid for this, this is offering really good performance. This is going to be better than a VA panel, which typically has a slower response time and it has more visible ghosting. It's not going to touch an OLED, but this is a fraction of the cost. So overall, I think the performance here is solid. This is not the fastest IPS panel that I've reviewed. It kind of sits middle of the pack, but it does have the higher refresh rate than a lot of those other IPS panel monitors, which are generally around 200 to 240 Hertz. Now, from my experience playing FPS games with this, if you can get close to the 300 or 320 Hertz, this thing is a blast. It looks really, really smooth. Just keep in mind, actually hitting those higher refresh rate numbers will depend on your hardware and your game settings. So we have solid performance with this monitor, but we also have very vibrant colors. This has plenty of adjustments in the panel menu, so you can tailor the look to your liking. And I would say with the amount of adjustments, it's probably more towards the upper end of the IPS panel monitors that I've reviewed. Some come and they're pretty bare bones. Here they give you a decent amount of stuff to adjust, which I do appreciate. And this has really good color gamut coverage. We were 1% off on the DCI-P3. Again, I think for the sRGB, they mean color space, not color gamut. But overall, it's just extremely vibrant. And you pair that with a solid 450 nits, and you have a just overall good picture quality when it comes to this monitor. You do have the dreaded IPS panel glow here, though, which is a bummer. And you have the lower contrast ratio that you do get with IPS panels as well. So this has solid colors, it's very vibrant, you have solid nits or brightness with this, and this being a 1440p monitor at 27 inches, it also has a good pixel density, so text clarity here is really good. That's both for in-game text or subtitles in a game, but also when using applications. So for anyone out there that games, but you also use your PC for a lot of text-based apps, you're going to be good to go here. So we have solid performance, really good colors, the panel is vibrant, good brightness, good text clarity because of the solid pixel density, and all of this doesn't just apply to PC. This also applies to consoles as well. The big thing to keep in mind when it comes to consoles, yes, you have access to the 4K, you are capped at the 60 Hz and not the 120 Hz. You lose certain things like the Xbox Series X not having Dolby Vision, which is a proprietary type of HDR, and that one showed that you don't have the 24 Hz when it comes to consuming content with 4K, or the 50 Hz, which that one was a little bit weird because it showed up later on the separate menu where you could enable that option. But with upscaling to 4K, I don't ever really notice a difference if I'm on a 1440p monitor doing that. It just looks the same. It looks like 1440p. You have to think about the integer scaling with that. Typically, I don't do a deep dive, like how are they doing that when it comes to this monitor with consoles upscaling to 4K. Most of the time, it just doesn't seem like a mode most people are going to use, because if you are upscaling but you're capped at 60 Hertz, most people may choose to keep it at 1440p where it visually looks basically the same, and then keep that access to the 120 Hertz because they would have a smoother overall experience at 120 Hertz than 60 Hertz. So with consoles, this performs great. I would just say keep it at 1440p, 120 Hertz, and you'll be fine. And then everything else applies here. We have solid performance, we have really good colors, it is a vibrant panel, you have solid brightness, the text clarity still looks good. Everything with consoles is going to be the same as it would be with PC. Looking at the molding, I do like the overall aesthetics of this. There is one caveat that I'll talk about here in a little bit, but overall I like the look of this monitor. I also like the fact that they give you the 3-year warranty with this, because more common is a 1-year warranty, but with this having the 3-year warranty, you just have a better peace of mind when it comes to the longevity of this monitor. The caveat to that is I've never had to do a warranty claim with KTC, so I don't know what that process is like. And then last, I do like the fact that they have all of the mechanical adjustments that they have here, not just tilt, which you tend to find when it's in this price range that this one sits in. It's usually pretty limited. We're starting to see more monitors give these other options when it comes to these mechanical adjustments, but sometimes they're even limited to just tilt and just the height adjustment. This one, we get the height adjustment, we do have that tilt, but we also have swivel, and at 45 degrees, that's a larger amount of swivel than a lot of other monitors on the market offer. And then you also get the pivot, the 90-degree pivot in either direction, so you are fully covered here. Shifting over to the negatives, I'm happy to report I don't have any standout negatives. There was nothing that was very glaring as being a problem or an issue with this monitor. I do have a handful of gray area things, which are things you may or may not care about. Starting here with the HDR, which is okay, but this isn't true 10-bit color, which really with 10-bit color, that is more important if you're dealing with content that you're editing in Photoshop or Premiere Pro and you need to really use true 10-bit color to do any of the work within those applications, or if you're dealing in color grading or anything like that and you need to match the footage that you've recorded in 10-bit and then you need to edit it and it has to be pure 10-bit. For gaming, the 8-bit plus FRC is fine most of the time. There are some people out there that say that they can tell the difference between the two. I don't know if that really has to do with the true 10-bit color, or a lot of times when a monitor does have true 10-bit color, it's going to be an OLED or it's a mini LED and you have a bunch of local dimming zones. So there's more features stacked with the HDR that leads to an overall better experience, which is why you can tell the difference between the two. This is, again, it's okay. It's not anything that I would get this specifically for the HDR experience, because you have 8-bit plus FRC, no local dimming zones. You don't have a really high peak nit of like 1,000 plus. It's just not really geared towards that. But for some people, they like to play certain games with it turned on, where maybe it does improve their gaming experience. But most of the time with this, I leave it turned off. When it comes to consoles, those are generally a better HDR experience out of the box, because there's not a lot that you need to mess with. So for console gaming, it is a better experience than on PC, where you do need to spend a little bit more time per game to adjust the settings. After that, I think the molding here does look really great. I like the aesthetics, but with this being white, just keep in mind it is more prone to getting scuff marks, and if those do pop up, you may not be able to get some of those out. I actually did this within the first day and I was kind of upset with myself. I tried to get this off. I used a magic eraser and scrubbed it, cleaning products, and it just wouldn't come off. But I did hit this on the corner of something pretty hard. And so again, just keep that in mind. The aesthetics look great, but just try not to get it scuffed up, because you might not be able to get that out. Last here, we have some of the really nice extras that I like to see, which here we have all of the mechanical adjustments, not just some. Again, usually you may be just locked into tilt, but here you're going to get the height, the tilt, the swivel, the pivot. That's great. We actually have 2 HDMI ports and 2 DP ports. A lot of times you may only see 1 DP and 1 or 2 HDMI, but beyond that, we don't have any extra USB ports, specifically USB extension ports. You don't have a USB Type-C that can be used as a display input. You don't have a built-in KVM switch because you're lacking those ports. That would probably be the bigger one that I think some people may want. And if that is the case, there are other monitors out there close to the same price point that may offer that. The bigger thing there is to contrast that against performance. I would choose this, lacking those extra features, if I'm comparing it to a VA panel, because the VA panel typically is slower, more ghosting. I would much rather have the increased performance and overall vibrancy of an IPS panel over a VA panel, which still has vibrant colors. It can, but usually it is a slower response time, and it does have a better contrast ratio, slightly less panel glow compared to an IPS, but overall I think performance just matters more. But again, if you really need the extra USB ports, a KVM switch, I would look at other products that are out there. If I can put some in the description, I will do that for you guys. With that, it may be slightly more expensive, but this is a pretty competitive price range in this $200 to $300 that this finds itself. So there are some that are out there. And that's actually going to wrap up the gray area thing. Overall, I think the thing to take away from this video is you have solid performance, really good colors and vibrancy. You have the mechanical adjustments with this, and you have the really good pixel density, so text on this thing looks great. And it's all coming in at a really affordable price point. So that's gonna wrap this video up. If you have any questions about this monitor that I did not answer in this video, let me know in the comment section. I will make sure to answer that for you there. I will have a link for this in the description, as well as a handful of other monitors if you want to check those out, and if you want to pick this one up. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, hit the like button for me, as it helps the channel out. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.